Hello and welcome to this two-part webinar series on the Eurocodes in Ireland, brought to you by the NSAI. My name is Ken Murphy, and over the course of this series I'm going to explain what the Eurocodes are, what is currently happening in the Eurocodes, and how you can get involved. Part 1 of this series will look at what the Eurocodes are and the revision that is currently underway, while Part 2 will explore the work being done by Irish experts to help and the ways that you can get involved. Now, without further ado, what are the Eurocodes? The structural Eurocodes are a set of harmonized design codes for building and civil engineering works which allow for a consistent design approach to be taken when designing structures across Europe. They comprise of a set of 10 Euro norm or EN standards with the designation in Ireland of ISEN 1990 through to ISEN 1999. I'll get into the structure of the Eurocodes in a bit more detail later on, but for now I'll just mention that within the 10 EN standards there are 58 parts covering a number of specific items such as structural fire design, as well as structure-specific parts dealing with bridges, silos and tanks, for example. To get an idea of how influential these codes are, you have to appreciate the numbers using them. At present, there is an estimated 500,000 engineers using them, and the codes have been adopted and are in use in 34 European countries, as well as further afield. But what is the purpose of the Eurocodes? Eurocodes came about to support the European internal market by removing barriers to trade in the area of construction and engineering services. They serve as reference documents and as a means of proving compliance with the Construction Products Regulations Basic Requirement 1 on stability and 2 safety in the case of fire. They are also a basis for specifying contracts for construction works, especially in the area of public procurement, and provide a framework for drafting harmonized technical specifications or standards for construction products, commonly known as HENs. And finally, closer to home, the use of Eurocodes is a means of proving that your structural design will comply with the requirements of the Irish building regulations where they are applicable. The initial approach of the Eurocodes was first conceived by the European Commission back in 1975 and were initially published by the Commission in 1984. Following the launch of the Construction Products Directive in 1989, responsibility for the Eurocodes was handed over to the European Standardization Organization, CEN, and over the next 20 years the Eurocodes were developed further. In 2010 they were adopted in Ireland, and after which they were referenced in the Department of Housing's technical guidance documents as a means of proving compliance with Irish building regulations. In 2015, work to revise the codes was started, and is currently revised drafts of the codes are being issued for public comment and review. But more on that later, especially in part 2. Earlier, I briefly mentioned the structure of the Eurocodes, and in this image you can see the links between the codes. First, we have EN 1990, the basis for design, which is the overarching code and which links all the other Eurocode standards together. It is used in conjunction with the Actions on Structures Eurocode EN 1991, also known as Eurocode 1, as well as EN 1997 or Eurocode 7 for geotechnical design, and Eurocode 8 EN 1998 for seismic design or earthquake design. All of these standards feed into the Construction Material Design and Detailing Standards, of which there are 6. Eurocode 2 EN 1992 for concrete, Eurocode 3 EN 1993 for steel, Eurocode 4 EN 1994 for composite materials made of concrete and steel, Eurocode 5 EN 1995 for timber, Eurocode 6 EN 1996 for masonry such as brickwork and concrete blocks, and Eurocode 9 EN 1999 for aluminium. This image demonstrates the links between the Eurocodes and other standards that might be used on a construction project. Here we have the design of a bridge. First we have the Eurocodes, which we talked about in the previous slide, so EN 1990 for the basis of design, Eurocode 1 for the actions on the structure, Eurocode 7 for geotechnical design, and if needs be, Eurocode 8 for earthquake and seismic design, as well as the material detailing and design codes, particularly Eurocode 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now, along with those, these can be used in conjunction with other EN standards, European standards, for materials such as EN 206 for concrete, and for products such as bearings and barriers, and as well as execution such as EN 1090 for the fabrication and welding of steel. All of the Eurocode standards and their parts are laid out in the same way across Europe. The grey pages at the front of this image are developed at national level in each country. These are a national title page and a national foreword, providing basic information about the Eurocodes in the respective country. In Ireland, these are developed by the NSAI. Then there is the core Eurocode EN text, which are the blue pages. And these comprise of a title page, the main normative text, and annexes which support the normative text. The text of these pages is the same in all 34 European countries, irrespective of the language it is translated into. It is text that is written in a common technical language, which can be translated verbatim into English, French and German. Finally, accompanying these standards are national annexes and non-conflicting complementary information, or NCCI for short. These documents are developed and maintained at a national level because the levels of safety required for buildings and engineering structures are in fact controlled at a national level through a mechanism known in the Eurocodes as the Nationally Determined Parameter, or NDP. An NDP allows countries to make their own choices and set their own requirements for certain elements, principally on safety grounds in the Eurocodes. NDPs are set out in the accompanying national annex to each Eurocode part, and in Ireland, the NSAI is responsible for these documents. NCCI documents provide additional guidance, which is not in conflict with the Eurocodes, but is needed to help a designer use the Eurocodes in the country in which they are designing. Now, it should be mentioned here that the national annexes are normative in their country of origin. What that means is that you need to use the national annex for the country in which the structure you are designing is to be built in. So, if you are designing a structure to be built in the UK, you need to use the UK national annex and not the Irish national annex. And when the structure is being built in Ireland, the opposite is true. You have to use the Irish national annex and not the UK national annex. So what's currently happening? Well, if you recall earlier, I mentioned that in 2015, work had started to revise the codes. The revised codes will be known as the second generation Eurocodes, and the development work was mandated by the European Commission through its mandate M515 in December 2012. It has become one of the largest standardization projects funded by the European Commission and EFTA countries, with the total amount of funding provided to complete the work standing at €11.8 million. This ambitious project to revise the codes is being overseen by SEN's Technical Committee, SEN TC 250 Structural Eurocodes. The work is being led by the British Standards Institute, BSI, which holds the Secretariat for the Technical Committee on behalf of SEN, and this represents the UK's commitment to the Eurocode project. Now, drafts of the second generation Eurocodes are currently being launched for public comment, for review and to vote on, and this is something we'll touch off more in part 2. The main goals of Mandate M515 and the second generation Eurocodes are to enhance the Eurocode's ease of use and provide clarity for the users of the codes, incorporate new design, performance and robustness requirements, reduce the number of nationally determined parameters where possible and improve harmonization of the codes, and finally to develop a number of new Eurocode parts to provide guidance on the assessment and retrofitting of existing structures, the use of structural glass, and for actions on structures due to atmospheric icing and waves and currents. This is a significant body of work which will also have an impact at national level here in Ireland, especially as our national annexes I mentioned earlier will need to be revised. Finally, for further information on the Eurocodes and on research into their use, please visit the European Commission's Joint Research Centre website. It is an extremely informative site and provides a significant amount of background detail on the Eurocodes. On the development of the Eurocodes within CEN, or for other European standards in general, you can visit the CEN Standards website by just Googling CEN TC 250. On standards in the construction sector from an Irish perspective, you can visit the NSAI site. Again, just Google NSAI Construction Sector. Here you will find a useful database of standards related to the Irish construction sector. In the second part of this series, I'll talk about what is needed at national level in more detail, what Irish experts are doing to help, and how you can get ahead of the game by getting an early understanding of upcoming changes. So thanks for listening, and I hope you'll follow up by listening to part 2 of this series.